The Chiefs look like they're going to be franchise tagging star corner L'Jarius Sneed. Let's talk about it.
Hey, what's good, y'all? It's your boy JD6 here with my man. Shout out to KC Sports Authority. Make sure y'all go check that podcast out, man.
You heard the man.
And welcome into another episode of the KC Sports Authority podcast. You are watching us over here on the YouTube channel. You can also listen to us over on Spotify. If you are one of those watching us here on YouTube, thank you for supporting us so far. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe button right now on the screen there. On our way to 500, and we need your support. My dog in the background would also love your support so he can have some more room to play with. So hit that subscribe button for us. We greatly appreciate it. You can also hit us up on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at KCSA Pod. Christopher with me tonight because we're going to talk some Chiefs. It is officially off season. We've had a few weeks, to take in the celebration of the Super Bowl. But now the Chiefs are faced with potentially one of their most important and biggest off seasons in a decade or so. Not for the typical reasons we've had in the past, but because they have all these guys that need to get locked in long term, or to see if the Chiefs want to go in a different direction. First up, though, this was going to be the L'Jarius Sneed versus Chris Jones conversation. And now, of course, with today's news, the Chiefs are informing L'Jarius Sneed that they plan on using the franchise tag. Of course, that is not official yet. That hasn't even come from the Chiefs themselves yet. But it's been reported on by several reporters already that they do plan on using that franchise tag, which would put Sneed anywhere between about 19 and 20 and a half million, give or take, for this upcoming year. So, Chris, let's start there. Are you surprised? Would you have gone this route with Sneed getting the franchise tag over Chris Jones? I mean, to me, this seemed like a no-brainer. It was going to happen.
Yes, it was a no-brainer going into the season, and then as soon as Veach said he was like 80% sure they were going to use their franchise tag, you knew who he was talking about. The hit is just too high on Chris Jones, so doesn't really come as a shock to most of us that have been plugged into how this offseason is going to progress. But hey, they put the franchise tag on Sneed, gives them a lot of options. It sounds like they're in the market to, they're going to play hardball the way the Chiefs do. They're going to have an offer on the table. If they don't, he's more than welcome to look for another deal. The Chiefs can try to work a trade like they did with Tyreek Hill. Or worst case scenario, he comes back and plays one more year for, like you said, the $19 million. So it was really the only thing that made sense financially because, again, the Chris Jones one was just going to be too big for that to even be an option.
Yeah, 31, 32 million versus 19, 20 million. That's a large chunk of change right there. And even Chris Jones, if, again, that's another episode, we'll dive into his contract. Even if he gets close to that, you'd still rather have just the franchise tag alone being used on Sneed. So, yeah, that gives them several options now. Of course, the first thing it does is it extends the window for them to get a contract put together. If you guys checked out the press conference earlier today from Brett Veach, there's a lot of things he said in there that could indicate a lot of scenarios. Everything from, hey, we feel good about getting a contract offer done, to, hey, we've got our limit, and if he wants more, then he's welcome to go find that deal, and then we'll figure out how to make a trade work. So yeah, he can extend the talks. We had about a week until the the franchise tag window would close. So this was going to happen at some point, and it'll become official sometime over the next several days. But that'll allow Sneed the ability to start having conversations when free agency hits with other teams to see if there's a deal out there that he can get that is better than what the Chiefs offer. And if there is a deal that they feel good with, then the Chiefs can start having those discussions about trade compensation. Obviously, I think as Chiefs fans, we hope that doesn't go through. We hope that whatever offer he does get from the Chiefs is one he likes and wants to sign. So let's start with that. I have a feeling I think I know what offer is on the table. I have no source on this to tell me anything. This is just me looking at previous deals from the last couple of years and kind of just seeing how the Chiefs tend to operate. So I have a ballpark idea of what I think he's been offered. According to Spot Rack, anywhere between 16 to 18 million per year is kind of what the market value suggests. And to use some comparisons, they're looking at guys last couple of years. Jair Alexander signed a 4-year, $84 million deal 2 years ago, about $21 million a year. Denzel Ward signed his 5 for 100 years, or I'm sorry, 5 years for 100 mil at 20 million a year. Marlon Humphrey, 19.5 million a year. Jalen Ramsey, 20 million. Trevon Diggs, 19.5 million. So that's kind of what they've been looking at. And then outside of that, the rest of the guys that have gotten paid are all more that 10 to 12 to 14 million. So Sneed's probably going to be somewhere in the middle there. But as Chiefs fans, we do feel Sneed is top of the line when it comes to talent and ability at his position. Do you think he is worth commanding that type of contract, that higher end, the 20-22 million, or what do you think his range is in this offseason?
I think he's worth it, but not for the Chiefs. Like, I think that there's a lot of good things that L'Jarius Sneed. I mean, you just, if you watch the Chiefs this year, which if you're watching this, you obviously did. Like, he was just incredible. The tone he set, the way he was able to, like, strategically pick his penalties to get in the receivers' heads. Like, that's going to be the one thing used against him in contract talks is, hey, he was the most penalized corner, but it worked. It was an unnecessary. It was a necessary penalty most of the time. So, like,
Yeah.
those kind of things, it's, again, I'm going to come back to the tone setting because that's what I think he does better than anything else. But you know what the Chiefs do better than they do than anything else is bring in corners. So, like, if he can get that kind of money I don't think it should be from Kansas City because you got to play to your strengths. And while I would love Snead to be here, like, love to, 3 for 45, which is a little low ball, 3 for 50, like, I think I'd be okay with that. I think there's going to be a team out there that wants to give him like 4 for 80, or something crazy like that, to where he's getting that 20 per year or close to over a longer span. So, I'm kind of echoing what Veach said, where it's like we would love to have him back. We're going to do what we can, but at the same time, there's a business we can't match it. He's going to be someone that I think they're okay with letting go.
Yeah, again, from a Chiefs perspective, he's probably one of the best corners we've had in the last 10, 15, 20 years, give or take. There's a lot of guys that have had good seasons. And I think the other thing you said, other than just the penalties, nationally speaking, Snead doesn't really show up on the stat charts the same way some of these other guys do. He doesn't get the 4 to 8 interceptions a year, but he does get those 2 to 5 sacks. He timely blitz. But I mean, we saw this year, we talked about it over and over and over, just how many guys he shadows all year that are top threats that just don't put up any stats against him. And I know the statistics aren't really going to show that per se, but we know what Snead's value is. He's kind of the perfect corner for this bag system, especially having McDuffie across from him. So we would love to have him back in the Chiefs uniform this next year. I agree with you there. I think there is a number that the Chiefs are like, hey, anything above that, we just can't. I mean, you have to think about this. Not only is there L'Jarius Sneed to figure out, you've got Chris Jones, who's going to command almost double what Sneed could get, almost, not quite, but almost double, that 30 million range. That's a lot of money. You've got Nick Bolton waiting in the wing at some point. You've got Creed Humphrey to figure out. You've got Trey Smith to look at. Yeah, decisions on Joe Tooney of keeping him around or moving on. You've got question marks at left tackle or right tackle, depending on what you do with Juwan Smith. Justin Reed is going to be coming up on extension talks again here soon. So you've just got a lot of guys waiting in the wings that also need to get paid and are going to expect to get paid. I mean, even Willie Gay this year, doesn't sound like he's going to be back, but another guy that's looking to get paid. Charles Amini, you got decisions there. So there's so many guys that need to have these conversations and decide where the value is. I still think Sneed's probably number 2. Chris Jones is probably the most important contract that they'd like to get done, and Sneed's definitely second. I don't know how easily replaceable Sneed is with how he fits into this system perfectly, but it's definitely a deal we'd like to see get done. I'm kind of on the side of, I don't think whatever offer the Chiefs give, it's going to be more than 3 for 55. Maybe they go 3 for 55 and they give a higher guaranteed, like 35 to 37 million, and then they're able to have an out after the first 2 years or something, or heavy incentive laden. It just feels like the way he played this year, he may have priced himself out of at least our market. This administration, this front office has never really, outside of Patrick Mahomes, gone and just given the bag to the guy that deserves it. Again, Snead deserves a big contract. We saw this with Tyreek Hill a couple years ago, different position, but at the peak, Tyreek Hill, top 3 wide receiver in the league. Snead, you could argue, is a top 3 corner right now. And we saw that they were not willing to go above that 25, 26 million that they had on their numbers versus Tyreek Hill wanted 30 million. Then we see the same thing with Orlando Brown Jr., wanted the 25 to 28 million, give or take, that kind of range. Chiefs are like, we feel pretty good at 20. And if you don't want 20, then I guess we'll figure something else out. We see them move on from that and then go out and sign Jawan Taylor for almost the exact same contract that was offered to Orlando Brown Jr. So the history kind of tells us that the Chiefs are not going to go above their number. They're not going to go out of their way to really pay extra to keep a guy, regardless of how much they desire him. So that's the contract I'm looking at. 3 for 50. Spotrac has them getting a 4 to 64 million, 4 to 80 million. I know that's a wide range there because it all comes down to the guaranteed money and the outs. But he's the top corner in this year's class, I think. I mean, there's a lot of other good guys in this class. But the things that Sneed does, he's just so physical. He's a big body corner that can go up against the best. So he's going to command a lot. And there's going to be plenty of teams that line up to throw some money at his direction. So what do you feel is the most realistic outcome moving forward? Does he do an actual extension in Kansas City? Does he go out, find the team that's got the offer for him he likes, and the Chiefs trade him? Or does he just go, you know what, I'm going to prove it one more year. I'm going to stick around on this 1-year contract, 19, 20 million, do it again, and then go out next offseason when hopefully the salary cap goes up even more and can maybe get that 4-year, $20 to $23 million range.
As rare as it really truly does happen, I think the trade is the number one thing I'm banking on. And it really comes down to, like, just look at the roster. Look at the cornerback crew without L'Jarius Sneed. Now look at the D-line without Chris Jones. Look at the offensive line without those two pieces. And, oh, by the way, look at the wide receivers, which we know is going to be a vocal point as well. Which group looks the best without said free agents?
The cornerback room.
The corners,
secondary.
Like by a mile. By a mile. It's not even close. You have how many Josh Williams and Jalen Watson were your third and fourth corners, and they're some of the best third and fourth corners in the league. You have an all-pro in Trent McDuffie. Like, okay, maybe you go out and get, instead of having to sign like a guy for like 10 million to be CB2, you do like a Mike Edwards kind of signing for the corners. Obviously, Mike Edwards was a safety before corners. Guy that's got some experience. You pay $3.5 million. He may be corner 3 or 4 as insurance, but also he may have to be a 2 if there's injury, like one of those kind of guys, because of the depth there. So I just think it makes too much sense for them to trade it just based on all the decisions they have to make and the way the roster's constructed.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of both those guys, Josh Williams and Jalen Watson. Obviously, both of them had a really big rookie season. That was kind of when Sneed was just kind of hitting the scene nationally and being a real top corner. And of course, McDuffie, just after he came back from his injury, we could just see the talent all over the field. So that cornerback room has a lot of experience for how young they are. I think the question is, we've never really seen an extended time, at least an extended time with McDuffie on one side of the field where you have Watson and Williams out there playing that corner one role. Because even in this year's system, McDuffie, who might be a better corner than Sneed, isn't the CB1 this year. It was Sneed. Sneed was the guy covering all the top receivers, and McDuffie was playing the slot. Obviously, Spags loves the versatility, and both those guys can play inside out. And we've seen Watson and Williams do a little bit of both, but most of those guys are going to be the Sneed type replacement. Williams is another big time corner, big size, like 6'2", 6'3", big physical guy that could play that type of role. And then they get that Swiss Army knife in Shamari Connor. We've seen him move Brian Cook around the field. So the Chiefs do have a lot of depth there. Obviously, losing Sneed, you would feel like that depth's a little rocky at the top end at least. But it does feel like this is a position group. Like if you looked at all the position groups on the team, like you said, this is the one that they probably feel the most comfortable with the depth from top to bottom. Even the guys that are on the lower end, they're like Echo Boydo, had a great last half of the season on special teams to where, maybe another full off season with him, he shows some more things. So I'm with you there. I think 60%, 65% chance that Sneed's gone, 35 to 40% chance that he's back, especially after the way things were kind of worded today, that they're open to a trade conversation. Usually when you see something like that and the player has the ability to go start negotiating with other teams, it's almost a foregone conclusion. I mean, we saw that with Orlando Brown last year.
Mhm.
Didn't really work out for Chris Jones in the offseason. I don't know how much he was really talking with teams necessarily, but most guys in recent history suggest that once they start talking with other teams, aka Tyreek Hill wanted to get a bigger contract. He had the Jets and the Dolphins calling at him. So I think that's the move. So let's talk about trades. Obviously, you would love to get a first round pick. There's only been a couple corners in the last 20 years that have gotten a first round pick, and those were the cream of the crop, Darrell Revis and Jalen Ramsey. Sneed may not quite be that level. He's certainly really good. He's very reliable. I think if you can get at least a second round, referencing that Marcus Peters deal a couple years ago, a second round pick and a fourth round pick in exchange for Peters and a sixth, that would be great. Maybe a second round pick and a couple compensatory picks later, fifth round, something like there. If they do make a trade, would you rather see it come in draft compensation or in a player trade at a different position of need?
No, I need it in draft compensation. Like, I just don't think you're going to get enough from a player. And the Chiefs just have such a track record of drafting players. Like, that's where I want. Obviously, there's been some misses, but like that's any team they hit on more than any other team over the
Yeah,
last
they do
5
have a
years.
high success rate.
Yeah, so like, I want that second round pick. I can't see a world where they get first just because like that's just too much for a guy that team's going to have to pay immediately. That's the only way it happens if there's already, a deal in place. So I think a second, a high second, like something with the Eagles, which I know is what he's been rumored to, or a team like that is probably the best case scenario. If you get like a third and a fifth or a third and a fourth, like I wouldn't be too upset about it. I think there's some fans that would be, but that wouldn't be the worst thing. You aim for second and see what you can get. Otherwise, if you don't like what you have, again, the Chiefs can just say no and keep
Yeah,
him for another year. Like, so
and I know Jones sat out week 1 this year, but I don't really see a scenario where if they don't make a trade happen, I don't see Sneed's camp going, we're just so pissed off, we're just not going to show up, because at his position, there's just not a ton of guys that get paid top money. So I don't feel like he would have that much leverage because there's just not that many teams lining up to throw $20 million at a corner all the time. Not that it's not possible, but it just seems like he doesn't seem like a guy that would go the route of sitting out because he is slightly on the older side for a corner. He's 27, going to be 28 this year, still at the kind of the peak of his career, just entering that peak. But it just doesn't seem like if the Chiefs didn't find a trade partner, that Sneed would find a way to just sit out, because it just doesn't feel like that's the case.
and he doesn't have the money to throw away like Chris Jones did. Like, he was a fourth rounder. This is his first contract. Chris Jones was a second rounder that already had gotten paid, like,
Yeah.
and had already made, Pro Bowls and a Super Bowl and gotten all
And
that extra
basically
money as
made
well.
everything back that he lost by sitting out through his incentives.
Right, exactly. Which for Sneed's a lot tougher. Like, you can put picks on it. You can, like, what do you put on it? Because
Probably
it's
all
so,
pro. Yeah.
yeah, it'd have to be that kind of stuff, which he got snubbed for this year. So like, so
What's the
there's
worst
some
draft
cases.
compensation you would take?
I don't think like if I don't think I'm saying anything less that doesn't include a third. I'm
Yeah.
not taking like 3/4 or 2/4 and a fifth, or 2/4 and the fourth receiver on whatever these teams come up with. Like, I think you have to get at least third, because even if you're paying him the 19 mil to play this year, like that's a lot of value. Even if you don't get him the next year, bringing him back for his age 28 season, like. That's worth it more than those fourth rounders that you could get
Yeah.
sometimes. So,
Do you think it'd be more likely that he would play on the 1 year franchise tag here, extension here?
um, sorry, what was that question one more
I'm
time?
sorry, I cut off there for a second.
No, you're good.
What do you think's more likely? Sneed playing out the 1 year franchise tag here in Kansas City and then moving on next offseason, or a contract extension with the Chiefs gets done this year?
I really don't think a contract gets done at all. Like, that's just how the Chiefs have done business. Like, and again, this is at a position that they have a strong track record. They have paid Patrick Mahomes, and that's basically about it. I know
Basically, yeah.
Joe Tooney got a nice little deal, and there's been some other. Sam Watkins got a nice deal. Like, there's been some other decent examples, but homegrown players that, again, is a strength already of this team. There is no track record at all. So I'm not holding my breath at Sneed at all.
And it won't be too long until they have to start the conversation of paying McDuffie too.
Right.
And at that point, could there be an overlap where Sneed's making about 20 million, and then you want McDuffie, who's now going, hey, I need 25 million. So yeah, I'm still on the board. As much as it sucks, I hate even talking about it. It does seem likely that the days of L'Jarius Sneed in a Chiefs uniform might be over. I mean, they got a lot out of him. I mean, he was a fourth round pick, right?
Yeah,
Fourth round pick that you didn't have high expectation for. Rookie season showed a lot of flash, a lot of skill set, some potential, and then you could definitely say, I mean, he's completely outplayed his expectations and draft positioning. Of course, I think if you went back to that draft, he'd probably jump way up the boards now. So even if you don't get much out of him draft compensation wise, you definitely got more value out of his time here than what he was getting paid. It'd be nice to get some good value. I think a second round and a fourth round seems pretty fair. There's still plenty of teams out there that need a lockdown corner that would go after him, and there's a lot of teams that might not make that trade because they got the cap space to go do it anyway, so they could just wait till next year. But we know how the NFL is. It's win now mode. Fans want to see you make the move now, and there's plenty of teams that could do that. The Lions need to upgrade their defense. The Texans, now they found a star in the making in CJ Stroud. They could upgrade their defense. The Colts have a couple positions of need, and they've got some cap space. And of course, the Bears have some money. So there's plenty of teams out there that would come calling for Sneed. But yeah, it does feel like those days of Sneed McDuffie tandem might be over sooner rather than later. How about a couple player trades? If a team called and were like, hey, we really value our draft pick, but we've got a player that's disgruntled, or we don't want to keep his contract, or we don't want to pay him in the next offseason. Are there any guys out there? When I'm speaking this, I'm thinking about receivers. Is there a team that you could swap Sneed for a receiver and maybe you exchange a little bit of draft compensation? Obviously, the one that's already been flying around all day today has been AJ Brown with the Eagles. The AJ Brown's unhappy now with his role, and the team's leaning on Devontae Smith more, and Brown himself has come out and said plenty of times, I don't know what all this talk is. I'm fine. But we know the Eagles, they had a very disappointing season, so maybe they look to kind of shift things up, and their secondary got burned bad last year in just about every game they played. So I've seen that one today. I don't know if that's realistic in your mind, but are there any kind of players out there that you think could be a somewhat interesting trade scenario?
I just don't really see teams doing it. I know there's a few fun ones like Terry McLaurin, I think, is another one that people would love. And not to say there's 0% chance. I think that's just too big of a pipe dream. I think it's the easy fix us fans try to come up with for a year. I really
I think if this was the NBA, it'd be a different story, because it's
Correct.
almost always got to be a player for player exchange.
Correct. You're 100% right. But this is the NFL, doesn't happen nearly as frequently. The draft picks are just so coveted because of the way the cap is constructed that, yes, we know that a quarterback on a rookie deal is the most coveted thing in sports. But when your quarterback's the highest paid player in the NFL, what's the most coveted thing? Quality players on rookie deals. And the more draft picks you have, the higher chance you have of doing that. So sure, you could bring in AJ Brown, his contract, or Terry McLaurin and his, 17 mil over the next 2 years, or, what I think there's 34 mil left or something like that.
About 34.
Yeah, whatever it is, that would be great. But at the same time, you're giving up more cap space for players that you don't necessarily know are going to have long term. So you're kind of in the same place, just with a different name. Wouldn't you rather just have the player that has won you 2 Super Bowls and been to 3 with you? I just don't see it happening, especially in this scenario. It's fun. If it did happen, I would be for it for the most part, depending on the player. But How about
Kyle Pitts?
Yeah,
I know Chiefs fans would probably love that.
Yeah, again, I would be excited about it. But is that something the Falcons are going to really try to do, especially if they're going to thinking about bringing in a quarterback and their defense was already fairly good last year? I don't know. There's things out there. I don't see a lot to where it makes sense for both teams.
Pitts is one I wouldn't mind doing just because of where his contract is. If you bring him in, he's about 10 to 12 million cap hit next year. that's kind of your wide receiver that you're going out and getting. That's not, the 18 to $20 million range. So that one would be interesting. Again, I don't think that's going to happen. It's probably like it would the Terry McLaurin one. It's probably more likely that the Chiefs try and put together a draft package for Terry McLaurin than including Sneed in that. They're going to probably trade Sneed, use that draft compensation, step back and look, okay, if we get the Chris Jones deal done, there's a lot of cap space going to him. We still have these positions of need. Guess what? We've got 3 extra picks from the Sneed trade. Now we can go make something happen. The Chiefs only have 6 picks this year, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a decent amount. But they've got obviously at the end of the first round, 1 second round, 1 third, 1 fourth, 1 fifth, and the 7th round pick. One trade I did look at, it doesn't really do a ton, and this would get you a first round pick question mark, so to speak, an asterisk, because the one thing that could potentially make sense is Detroit calls and says, hey, we love Sneed, want to figure out how to make this happen. Chiefs go, hey, give us your first round pick. And Detroit goes, you're crazy. Chiefs come back and say, hey, how about we do a pick swap? You move back a few spots, we move up a few spots. You give us 3rd round pick, we give you our 4th and our 5th, and we get to move up a few spots to get a guy that we feel. And if this happens, I'm talking about this is closer to draft day, because they feel like a guy's slipping in the draft to go up and get that wide receiver or a pass rusher that they really like or something. Again, that's not a big enough jump that I think it's realistic, but that's the only scenario I see where a first round pick is involved. It's because the Chiefs are trying to move up in the first round and put together, using Sneed as the biggest selling point in moving up those 4 or 5 spots.
Right. No, and that could definitely happen. Like if the less time he's traded or the contract's been announced as we get closer to draft day, the higher likeliness that does happen. Now, if he goes through draft day and we're sitting here being like, man, it does not sound like the Chiefs are going to give Sneed a long-term contract, then after draft day, after how everything's shaken out, how the Chiefs roster looks, you could also see a trade then for a player. That would be when the most likeliness for a player would be, is after the draft, after free agency.
Yeah, because after that, you don't really want a 2025
No, you don't
pick.
want it. No,
you want something
Sneed.
now.
You want Sneed, yeah. But if you're looking at your wide receivers and you're like, man, we missed out on this free agent. We didn't get the receiver we wanted in the draft. Yeah, however it shakes out, then maybe those player trades become a little bit more realistic.
Yeah. Let's see. Where do I want to go next with this? So, what impact do you think Sneed, again, assuming Sneed signs the franchise tag, regardless? I mean, he's gonna sign it. He doesn't really have much for an option there. After he signs it, whether he's traded or the contract extension talks continue, what kind of impact do you think that does have on the Chris Jones situation and maybe some of the other potential moves we might see the Chiefs do? Because they're going to come into, once free agency starts, without any other moves yet, they're going to have anywhere between about 7 and 14 million. We're kind of expecting MVS to be cut, save some money there. They'll have obviously they're going to have a conversation about restructuring a few other contracts, but there's going to be guys that don't come back. So if they did move on from Sneed, they would obviously give him some more cap space to go after Jones. But what impact does this move have on the likelihood of keeping Chris Jones?
Yeah, if Sneed signs it and like it does feel like he's going to play this year for the Chiefs, is that basically the scenario you're asking?
Sure. Yeah, let's go with that route first.
Yeah. If that's what you think is happening, then I don't see Chris Jones on this team. Like it's just the cap space and the holes other places. Like again, left tackle, right guard, what to do with the depth at the secondary, middle line or not middle linebacker, outside linebacker. Tranquil and Gay are currently off this roster, and then wide receiver. Keep coming back to that. Like I just don't see how with the cap space you can also take on a 4-year, $120 million contract or whatever Chris Jones is going to demand as well. And now, if Sneed's off the team and you feel pretty good with your DB room where you only need to maybe bring in one guy and maybe use like a 4th or 5th rounder, then you give that money to Chris Jones. I think that the likeliness skyrockets in that scenario. But if the Sneed's on this team, there's just too many holes that like I don't really like. I'm the biggest Nick Allegretti fan, and like it feels like if they have Sneed and Jones, like Nick Allegretti is going to be your starting right guard, Wyona Motors or whoever you draft is going to be your starting left tackle. Like that, those are the kind of things that are going to end up happening if you have both Sneed and Chris Jones on this roster next year.
Yeah, I that's what I've been thinking the last 2 weeks is I just don't see how we keep both. This isn't like the NBA where you can just go into the luxury tax year after year and the first and second apron to just continuously sign guys to stay on. It is so much harder in the NFL. Now we've seen Brett Veach and his team are wizards when it comes to this manipulating the salary cap, and they can obviously always restructure Mahomes' contract. They can restructure Kelsey. They could try and talk to Tooney to restructure. Heck, I even was looking at what if they try to talk Justin Reed into a contract extension early to push some of his money around because he's got 14 million on the books next year. So there's a lot of things they can do. It just feels like one of those situations where you can't have this much luxury year after year after year. And even if we want to go all in for a three-peat, if you do, then we're going to be cutting corners somewhere else. And either the offensive line is going to look worse. Now, thankfully, Trey Smith's still under contract for this upcoming year, but maybe he starts going, hey, he doesn't really have the leverage himself because he doesn't make a lot. But there's just too many holes on this team, which is kind of weird to say. I was thinking about this the other day, planning out some episodes coming up, and outside of quarterback position and tight end one, and that's about the only thing that you're looking at this roster that doesn't really have a hole on or a potential need for. Everywhere else, I mean, you need to replace receivers. You need to figure out who your second, third string running backs are going to be. You need to figure out, what you're going to do at linebacker if you don't keep Willie Gay or you don't get Drew Tranquil back. Obviously, the defensive line, Mike Dana is going to probably price himself out. So you got all these other concerns, and it just feels like if we go Sneed and Jones, then we're going to have to throw more younger bodies that are inexperienced at those positions. So I've been kind of thinking, if you have that 20 million, so Sneed gets traded, theoretically you have $20 million there to play with. Theoretically, most of that probably goes to Chris Jones to re-sign him. I still feel like that is need number one. If you re-sign Chris Jones, I feel pretty good with the way the rest of the defense is positioned so far that they can make up for Sneed's absence. Because if the pass rush is still as solid as they can be, then your corners don't have to defend for 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds. So that's kind of my take there. Is let's get Chris Jones locked up. But now that you free up that money that you have from Sneed, maybe you can look at that $20 million and dividing up into 2 players or 3 players at multiple positions of need. So I guess the next thing I was going to get into is if you did go that route, are there any free agent corners that you like that might be in that $3.5 to $10 million range, or a higher end corner that might make 10 to 15 million a year versus the 16 to 22? I've got a list of ones I like, but wanted to throw that out to you to see if maybe that's the more realistic route that they go in with Williams and Watson competing for cornerback 2, but then they also go sign one of these mid-tier veterans that's maybe still on the younger side, but has to go do a prove it deal.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few it's just scary because you just never know what you're like a guy like Adoree Jackson.
That was the first one on my list because he's another physical corner.
Right, exactly. He's the one that he feels like he has all the tools, but it's just something hasn't quite clicked consistently. Like he has plenty of. What's his market going to look like? Because again, he has a little bit of the name recognition, a little bit of the physical. But I just don't know what these guys are. But that would be someone that I think that would also be one on my list. The first guy I kind of look at and be like, he fits our system. He's big. He's physical. Let's bring this guy in.
Yeah, if you could get him at 3 for 38, 12 million a year.
Right.
That he's kind of the middle to high tier this offseason. But there's some other guys, like even Jeff Okudah is going to be a free agent. Went from the Lions to the Panthers, and not that he had a bad year, but bad team, so doesn't really quite get a lot of recognition. But he's a young player that's 24, 25 as a corner, still got a lot of potential. He could get anywhere from 12 to 16 million a year. 2 other guys that the Chiefs definitely looked at in the draft and didn't get, but Sean Murphy-Bunting,
right,
$7 to $10 million range is kind of what he's projected to be at. Rock Ya-Sin, who local 6'10" guy Jay Binkley loved Rock Ya-Sin coming out of the draft, and he was like, do everything possible, Chiefs, to bring this guy in. And he had a pretty decent season with Baltimore, had some injuries, but he's kind of that $6 to $10 million range. It just seems like it's probably realistic the Chiefs move Sneed, take some of that 20 million, some form or fashion, Go sign a veteran corner with 3, 4, 5 years experience to partner with the young group they have. Continue to develop Shamari Connor. Hope Brian Cook comes back from injury real well and can pair back with Justin Reed. Find that third safety again, whether that's bringing Mike Edwards back, and then take a flyer on a guy in the 4th or the 5th round like they usually do, and then maybe a couple guys come into camp and they kind of roll with that. It just seems like that's probably the route that feels the most realistic to me.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's just, again, makes too much sense.
What about any other positions that you think moving Sneed would give us more ability to go fill a need for?
I don't know if it's positions. I mean, everyone wants to talk about wide receiver. I've said it a bunch of times, but like honestly, it does the most, I think, in some of the other guys on this roster. Like again, not this year, but next year, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, Nick Bolton, all guys up. What are you going to do with Justin Reed or the safety position after that? What are you going to do with McDuffie in 2 or 3 years? Like I'm forgetting on the number. I think it's 3 because he's a first rounder. So, like it just opens up some of these other positions that, let's be real, like again, corner is a strength of the Chiefs. Like I'm not saying that Sneed's going to be easy to replace, but it feels like the track record supports that Sneed's replacement will be easier to find than Creed's, than Nick Bolton's. Like, and so do you want to prioritize that just based off how your team and your strength and evaluating is constructed? And I think that it's not the same across all 32 teams, which I think we lose sight of sometimes. It's like some teams are like, you have to have good corners, you have to do this, this, and this, and these are the positions you have to skimp on. But like everyone has their thing, and the Chiefs' clear thing. I mean, they got Mike Hughes, the former who did nothing in Minnesota, to play a decent corner. Charvarius Ward was a first-team All-Pro after having some good years in Kansas City. Like it just makes too much sense to let him go, as much as it sucks, and maybe prioritize some of these other positions.
And I don't want to speak for CJ because I know he's not on the pod tonight, but I have a feeling if CJ were on here, he'd be talking about how incredible Dave Merritt is and how much he doesn't get enough recognition nationwide as a top tier defensive back coach in the league. And what we've seen him do the last several years with these guys, to me, history suggests that he's going to figure out how to do it again with another under the radar kind of guy. So maybe that also, factors into, hey, as much as we love Sneed. Sneed is one of the best at his position. He had a fantastic season. The defense will look different if he's not here. But we also know how frustrating the offense was this year. So if you think about priorities there, you probably feel more confident that Spags and Merritt and the defensive coaches can figure out how to put somebody else over there that might not do 100% of what Sneed is, but if they can get 70% of the production Sneed had out of multiple guys being on the field more, that they'll probably go that route, because we just know this offense was so frustrating that Andy Reid's not going to go through a whole nother season of underperforming receivers surrounding Patrick Mahomes. No matter how successful they were in the playoffs, there at the end, they're going to go figure something out there. So it just feels like the defense is set up to rotate those guys. So if the season were to start tomorrow, how confident would you be in this corner group if it is Josh Williams, Jalen Watson as your number 2, number 3, not knowing who number 4 is yet?
I'd feel probably like a lot of teams in the NFL, actually probably better than most. Like you're probably still got a maybe number 9, number 10 overall corner depth with those 3 guys. So like maybe even higher. Like it's hard to tell just because they didn't need Jalen and Josh. Like Jalen and Josh split a lot of time. I think Jalen actually outsnapped Josh on actual defensive snaps this year. But like it was hard to tell which one was number 3 because the other 2 were so good. So like putting both of them on the field and I'm not as concerned about, because we saw it with when McDuffie went down. We saw it 2 years ago, and like they were still fairly good as rookies. Now they're going to be in year 3 doing this. Like I'm not as worried as maybe some of the other fans might be.
Yeah, and again, I think that all that right there just further speaks into the likelihood of Sneed probably not being on this team. Now, if he does come back, fantastic. We're going to be thrilled. It'll
be great. Like
my apologies.
Whatever happens, it will be for the best. Again, hope he comes back if it's team friendly. I don't think that's what L'Jarius wants to do. He shouldn't. Again, he doesn't even have $4 million of career earnings on base salary. I think a lot of the incentives and stuff that maybe doesn't show up on Sport Track has pushed him a little higher than that. But like his actual contract was like 4 years for $4 million as a fourth rounder. So like
he's still way too early in his
get paid.
career to be taking the hometown discount.
Yeah,
you can't also throw the hey, come win a ring with us because he's already done
He's
that.
won two
multiple times.
Like what is he gonna do?
So Sneed's probably gone. We'll obviously be keeping a close eye over the next couple weeks on that. Again, some of the teams that I've been looking at that kind of make sense: Detroit, Houston, heck, even Miami's popped up as a potential destination because they look to be moving on from Xavier Howard, but they need someone to pair up with Jalen Ramsey. I don't know if they would pay him that much to have two corners making $20 million plus. But yeah, there's a ton of teams that are going to be calling for L'Jarius Sneed services. He's a fantastic corner, and there's plenty of teams that would be tremendously better defensively with him on their roster. So the hope is, if that is the case, that the Chiefs can get the best possible deal out there. And if not, hey, if Sneed decides, hey, I'm good playing for $20 million this year, then all for it. Let's have him back, and then we'll say thank you at the end of next year and move on and hope the next guys come in. But that's about all I had on this one. There's a lot of off-season talk to get into, and we could sit here for hours and hours on end, but we want to divide it up over multiple episodes so you guys can come back and check it out. But Chris, anything else you want to add about Sneed or the news from today at all?
Nope. I'll be rooting for you, L'Jarius, wherever you land up.
As long as it's not in the AFC West.
Yeah, as long as it's not.
Which it probably won't be. I mean, the Chiefs aren't trading him to anybody in the AFC West, but
right. We got at least 2 years before we have to worry about him going to the AFC West or not. So,
other things coming up. Obviously, we're going to talk about Chris Jones' contract. Hopefully later this week or early next week. Hopefully, there's no news that comes out before that happens, because we'd love to have a fun conversation on that. We'll dive into the other positions of need this team has. There's really kind of 5 moves that I want to see, or 5 positions of activity that need to happen as far as who the Chiefs go after, re-signing guys and going after new guys in the free agency. And of course, a lot of draft stuff will be coming up. We got the combine coming up this week right now as we speak. They're getting that underway. There'll be a lot of fun stuff to dive into as we get into draft prep. It's February 27th right now, but the draft is like 6 weeks away. And then it's like not that long after that until summer stuff. And then next thing you know, it's football season again, even though the season just ended. So football is still king all year round. It is a 365-day-a-year sport. There's so much to dive into. So we'll get into more of that. So make sure you come back and check us out for further episodes. Again, if you're watching us over here on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, hit like on this video so more Chiefs fans can find it, and also get notified when the future stuff drops. You can come back to watch more of that. If you're listening on Spotify, again, thank you for listening to us either on your way to work, when you're at the gym, at home doing dishes, whatever it is. We appreciate the support you guys have been giving us so far. Share the podcast with a friend. Outside of Chief stuff, there's plenty of KU football, basketball, a little bit of KU baseball. Chris and I got some Royals baseball stuff coming up here soon. Just a lot of fun stuff to get into, and we hope you guys all come back to enjoy it. So until then, guys, he's Christopher Tenpenny. I'm Keegan Russell. This has been another episode of the KC Sports Authority podcast. Hope you guys come back and see us soon.